I think today's episode is actually for me, everybody. So I
Way to be
need you to
selfish.
help me answer this question. Because sometimes I'm not sure what recommendations to make when teachers are in this position that I'm about to describe. So imagine you're a teacher who is at the awareness stage that you want to do something different than what you've been doing in the past to strengthen student fluency. So whether that's basic fact automaticity or computational fluency, you're like, I know that what I've been doing isn't helping all learners, it's not supporting retention. I know, and I've been attending webinars, I've been reading books, I've learned that we can define fluency as more than just accuracy and efficiency, that flexibility is another component of it. But I don't know what that means for me tomorrow or next week. What is if I'm aware and I want to move from aware to mechanical towards routine, what is the first step?
Okay, but let's make sure we define those three stages you just talked about as well, because it's like we're speaking inside baseball. Maybe if we're not sure, what do you mean awareness? What do you mean mechanical? And what do you mean routine? Before we take that move.
Yeah. So awareness define, and I'm using Jim Knight's definition of the
Mm-hmm.
levels of implementation, but awareness means I know about it. I can tell you what it means. I recognize that maybe there's a change that has to happen, but I haven't actually put anything into action yet. Mechanical means I'm willing to start trying. And it might be a little clumsy, I might be unsure, but I'm trying things, I'm experimenting, I'm starting to make some changes in my practice, but they probably still feel uncomfortable, or I'm still reliant on a script or a lot of support. Whereas we get to routine and it's like, this is becoming just part of what I do. It's a habit. It's starting to feel more comfortable. But at routine, I might still be rigid. It's like, imagine you're implementing Kathy Fosno's problem strings, and it's like I'm still holding the book and reading the script and, following it exactly as it's printed because I don't own it yet.
Okay.
Whereas if I became proficient with that practice, it's like I have now internalized it. I understand it with depth. I understand the why, and so well that I can also adapt it, refine it, innovate it in response to student learning in my classroom.
So if we rewind, then you're saying, let's say I'm aware that fluency is more than just what I thought it was. So I'm aware now, but I don't know what that looks like in the mechanical, and I definitely don't know what that means for routine or proficient. I'm aware of what it might mean, but I don't know what that means for me going into my lesson tomorrow, because I sat in a PD session or I participated in a PLC where we talked about fluency as an important thing, or maybe someone shared the goal is fluency by the such and such. And I understand the term, but I don't know what that really means for me tomorrow. That's the question we're after here today?
That's a big question. So I think that there's things I think that we need to talk about before we jump into giving recommended solutions for tomorrow in class. One of them is, are we talking about basic fact fluency or are we talking about procedural fluency? Because I think we need to identify the differences between the two just to be really clear. So I think oftentimes when we hear fluency, teachers immediately are thinking basic fact fluency. The kids don't know their facts. I can't do anything with them because they don't know their facts.
Right.
Whereas fluency, I think in general, is much deeper, right? We can talk about procedural fluency. Can they look for an efficient strategy when solving a problem? And that might go beyond just basic facts, right? So I think we have to start there. I think we also need to make sure that teachers understand what they're working with, right? So we have to have some sort of assessment tool. So what does that look like? Some sort of a screener to just figure out, where are the students? What do I have that I can build on? So that I think in our fluency group, we're going to really dig into screeners and things like that next time. So that'll be fun to kind of dig into that a bit. So I think we kind of need to clear up that stuff first. And so I'd welcome your thoughts on that. And then I've got some other thoughts that I'll share.
Well, I think that you did make a recommendation, Beth, which
Mm-hmm.
is maybe a first move is to screen. Like maybe we need to
Well,
gather some
and get clear.
entry point. But you know what, I wonder, does it matter? Because, and this is why I'm going to say that. If I want procedural fluency, the big, really flexible, working with all four operators through application of different strands and concepts, I still need basic fact fluency. And I guess my question is like, where do you start? Right? Basic fact fluency is nested within that bigger umbrella of procedural fluency. So maybe do you target, like so we're talking about first moves, right? Like initial steps for teachers to go down this path of strengthening fluency. So I think you're right. We do need to get clear on what we mean, but I guess I wonder whether we're talking about the big umbrella of all procedures or computational fluency with less friendly numbers, all four operators, or owning automaticity of our basic facts. We still need to start somewhere. There still needs to be an entry point.
Right. So I do think that I 100% agree with you, Yvette, that we have to start with probably the basic facts first, because that's going to be the foundation from which students build upon for everything else they do in math, right? And I think that if we surveyed teachers, they would say that that is the biggest thorn in their side right now, is that students don't have that automaticity with their basic facts. So we need to kind of, I guess, sort of start by assessing foundational facts. I think that, for addition and subtraction, if students can't automatically add 1, 2, and 3, then that's where we need to start. So we need to assess that. Can they fluently add 1, 2, and 3, or are they still counting on? Are they counting on their fingers? Are they counting all? Are they counting 3 different ways to add 1, 2, and 3? So we need to start there. With multiplication division, can they multiply and divide fluently by 1s, 5s, 1s, 2s, 5s, and 10s? Those are your foundational facts. I think when teachers enter into trying to create their own plan for developing basic fact fluency, they revert back to how we learned it, right? We're all going to do our 1s, then the whole class is going to do 2s, then we're going to do our 3s and 4s, and we're just going to go in order until everything is memorized. When, a lot of research shows that there are some foundational facts, and if we want students moving from counting to deriving to mastery, which is what Baruti tells us, right? Then we have to build that foundation first. So we have to start with the 1s, 2s, 5s, and 10s with multiplication and division, and adding and subtracting 1, 2, and 3. Combos to 10, your doubles, 10 and some more. Those are all foundational skills that students need to have in place in order to derive the other facts, which is ultimately where we want them to get.
What I hear you saying, Beth, is that if I don't know all that, what you just said, I've got to invest myself in understanding, what am I really if I'm going to do an assessment, I could just put a piece of paper in front of a kid and go, is this going to tell me what I want to know? But I actually have to know what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
When I'm engaging with a student to gain this information.
100%.
What does it look like when a student is doing this, this move or this move? What does it look like if they have their doubles and they're counting this way and that way? We have to invest in ourselves primarily to make sure that we are positioned to make those moves, because it's okay, great, fluency tomorrow. Let's go in and assess. But I mean, the likelihood is that we have to make sure that we put an investment on ourselves to understand all these ideas. Is it me taking a course or taking a book or making really unpacking, or because I could spend 20 years in the classroom, dedicated to this practice, or I could make sure that we invested a little bit more into understanding this ourselves while we know that this is important. Or if I'm a leader, what am I doing to help that teacher see what this is supposed to look like at each stage? Because when we talk, Yvette, where I was thinking is you've talked about those stages. Do we know what this, if we are going to get narrow on basic fact fluency and then think about procedural fluency, what does it look like if I'm in awareness stage as a teacher to engage? My next move is to get into the classroom. What does it look like when I'm ready for mechanical? When I start to engage students in lessons that are strengthening these ideas, what should it look like for me to know as a teacher what the mechanical stage should look like, so I know that I'm still here and I need to get better? We have to take that approach too, so we can take the approach of here's what you could do in your class, but here's what we need to do to build ourselves up.
I think that I agree with everything everyone's saying, of course, right? It's we have to build our own capacity, of course. And it's we need to understand whether we're a teacher or a leader. But I do also think there's something to be said for I just need to start taking action, though. I can't wait until my own mathematical journey is, complete. And I think what I'm trying to, tease out today is what is one actionable step? So I think Beth already shared one. It's actionable actionable step is to do a screener, you know, to sit with students, interview style. I guess right now I would say, Beth, we are in a journey of exploring different screeners, but the one that we would most likely recommend is USNS. So the Universal Screener for Number Sense from Forefront would be a really good place to start. So I wanted to kind of give sometimes I feel like we don't do a great job of actually telling people which one. And so I think that we would say at this point in our journey of exploring screeners, not to say there aren't others, that is one that we would personally use in our own
Yeah.
classrooms.
I'm going to just interrupt quickly, though, Yvette, because that's a big ask to start administering a screener that maybe you're not familiar with, knowing that you're going to have to sit down one-on-one with students, right? So what can they do tomorrow to do a quick assessment just to get a pulse? A number talk. Put one of those basic facts up on the board and ask students all the different ways that they can think about entering into this. And then that's going to give you some information as to sort of where your group is. Is it going to give you individual information? No, but it's going to give you an idea of where they are. So starting with maybe an addition fact, I always go to the 8s and the 7s, 8 plus 7. Great addition fact that can, students can talk through a lot of different ways to add that. You're gonna be able to suss out, can they use their doubles? Do they use combos to 10? Are they still counting? Are they saying 8 and then counting on their fingers 7 to add 7 to that? So that's a great one. And then I would say that 8 times 7 is a great one for multiplication, just to again see, are students connecting their 4's facts to the 8 facts? Are they decomposing 7 into 2 and 5? Or do they have automaticity already? Can they just say 8 times 7 is 56, right? So that's one I always have to check myself. So I think just starting even with a number talk, and then based on that and the feel that you're getting from your class, then maybe we move into a formal big screener that we can sit down and do.
Okay, I'm going to be a devil's advocate.
Go ahead.
The move that you're describing, although I completely agree, would imply that I know what to ask. And I wonder if sometimes we need a tool to tell us what to ask and what to look for. Right? Like, I think that if I was going to go in and do dynamic assessment and I'm like, I know that this is a powerful fact to assess because I understand that, I think it requires maybe more cognitive lift for teachers than if I was told these are the ones to ask because these are, good indicators of okayness for fluency at this grade level. So that's why maybe I would lean toward a screener that's already been developed for me, because otherwise I'm the one having to come up with what particular facts to assess for that grade to demonstrate. So that's just another way of looking at it. It requires...
You could argue, though, you're right, Yvette, I think, in a way, because you could say, like, you could argue, like, if I'm coming up with the prompt to get me the information that I need to know to make an assessment where these students are on their fluency journey, you probably are arguing that you're not, in a way, in the awareness stage. Mm-hmm. You're already in the stage of mechanical and probably into routine if you can give the right prompt and then look for the right things the way that you described it, Beth. It's like, because you are not in the awareness stage. You're much farther than that. And so like, I think that is a good point to bring up here, which is like, how do I start when I don't have anything? And that's like the chicken or the egg situation we're just talking about is like, do I need to make sure that I think what you're saying, Yvette, is like, you got to start somewhere, because Jon, you're saying you need to like years of of learning here in order to get going. Well, that's not going to happen. So how do we get going when we don't have years? And you're saying the move here could be to rely on a pre-made screener. But then you got to go back and go like, is that the best move if I just have this thing that I have, and do I know how to use that?
Well, and right? The screener, I think, is going to give you far more information than just basic fact fluency. So if we're talking about just basic facts, yeah, it is the chicken and the egg, because do we invest in ourselves first and get comfortable and flexible with calculating first before we try something in the classroom? Or do we, like, Yvette, your question was, what can I do tomorrow in my classroom? So if I know there's a fluency problem, what can I do tomorrow, right? So I think that's the big question, right? So where do we start? I think, Jon, to your point, you have to be beyond just that awareness that there's a problem, I think, in order to try to make a change in your classroom. So, so what do? Do you invest in yourself first? Do you, I don't know, back at you.
I'm going to share a little bit of my own journey, what worked for me. I feel like I was not willing to wait until I had mastery or proficiency for it to impact my
Mm-hmm.
students.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm going to start this tomorrow. And so I did use, here in Ontario, many of us use Marion Small's Prime assessment. Like that was a good place for me to start, just to understand, developmentally, what should students be able to do, efficiently, confidently, with very little cognitive demand. So that was a good place for me to start. I remember doing that assessment and realizing things about students that I had no idea. Talking about that idea of procedural fluency, I remember I had a student in particular who I just couldn't figure out why she was struggling so much with application problems. It's like she seemed to be, a really good student. I couldn't unpack what was falling apart. Like, where was this derailing that every time she got to a multi step application type problem, she wasn't having success? And I remember I used Prime with her, and I learned through that assessment, based on like the descriptors and the information that came from it, that she was an additive thinker, not a multiplicative thinker. So when
Mm-hmm.
she looked at 5 and 15, she saw plus 10.
Mm-hmm.
She hadn't moved beyond that additive phase to being able to use multiplicative reasoning. And it's like, once I was able to unearth that barrier for her, then it was like I knew what the intervention was going to look like. I met with her parents. We talked about ways to support her at home. And it's like, but I wouldn't have known that had I not used a research-based tool to understand development. So I guess that's why I'm saying, maybe we do start with something that's research-based, that's going to give us some guidance, that's going to give us some practical next steps as a starting point if we don't know. Another resource that I really liked was Alex Lawson has a book called What to Look For. And basically, it gives you, like you were describing, Beth, like these are some quick number talk type routines that you can do, administer it based on what the student does. Here's your next step. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember using that with my son because he got stuck at the counting all phase. So it would be like, here's 4, this is when he was in like kinder. So he'd have, here's 4 red, here's 5 blue. He'd count 4 red, he'd count 5 blue, and then he'd recount them all 1 to 1 from the beginning when I said how many were there. And so in that book, it was like, if your student, here's the prompt, if they do this, then do this. And I
Mm-hmm.
really needed that. Like, I didn't have the understanding myself to know when a student gets stuck at, like, let's say they're still counting for multiplication or they're doing repeated addition. How do I
Mm-hmm.
take them from repeated addition to something more sophisticated? What's the move?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, those were kind of two. I didn't do this on my own, right? I looked to
Mm-hmm.
research-based resources that were going to build my capacity while I was teaching. I didn't read the book and then go and do the work. I was reading the book as I did the work, essentially.
Maybe we can tag that resource in the show notes for everyone
Absolutely.
to look at. Yeah. And that could be another podcast too, where we could actually dig into some examples of what teachers could do. So I think this is a pretty big question that you're asking,
For
right?
sure.
Yeah.
Yvette, think about, rewind a little bit even further, right? Like, think about what went into getting you to that space to take those moves yourself. And if we can recreate that, because if I'm a leader designing, like we started this episode by going like, oh, teachers are now in the awareness that fluency is a priority to strengthen here in my classroom, which we all knew it was anyway, but now maybe we were engaged to make it more of a priority, which means maybe I sat in that PD session, or maybe we were at a staff meeting and it was like, this is our goal for the year, is how do I design, or what should I think about now to design the professional development that started, knowing that my teachers may be in awareness, to put them in a position to be like you. We talked about the stages of awareness, right? And I think mapping out, what does it look like for the teachers I'm working with, or I'm supporting, or the teachers in my building at each of these stages, and what are the moves that I want teachers to take at the mechanical, when they're in the awareness, what should that look like? What are the resources that we should be putting in front of them so that they have the moves available and the training available. Like, is the staff meeting that I'm doing this at tied to the PLC or the coaching that's going to come after? Like, we got to make sure that's coordinated to support this moving through these stages. Like, mapping that out is extremely important. That having the awareness that we need to have these teachers are going to be at these different stages, and how do I build the look-fors to help each teacher move through the stages of what does it look like teaching this, so that the teachers have the idea of like, what does it look like in the classroom when students are also strengthening their fluency. So it's a multi-layered, very meta type of thinking that has to happen. But I mean, you start there to go, how do I create an Yvette who will have the right resources at her fingertips to do that type of learning and that type of work at the same time of trying to implement in our classroom? That's an important move to make as a leader.
Yeah. I would say one other thing that I think I would recommend for teachers who just aren't sure where to start is to think about what your practice looks like in the classroom. Are you providing students an opportunity to practice the basic facts, the fact fluency, whatever it might be in the classroom? So what does that look like? So, maybe another, what can I do tomorrow would be teach students how to play a game to practice fact fluency, and then commit to providing time for students to practice by playing those games in the classroom. And then maybe you're doing that as you're learning about the best ways to implement, what to look for, all of these other things. But that's something that you can definitely make a change tomorrow. Find a great game. It could be something as simple as addition or subtraction war or multiplication, right, with a deck of cards. So it could be just a very simple game, but providing that opportunity for students to practice in class. Because I think what we know, what I hear from lots of teachers I work with, is that they're relying on parents to help students fill in that fluency gap that might be missing. And it's just not working. So we can't just be giving them a time test on Monday to see where they are, give them a time test again on Wednesday, and then on Friday, that's the one that goes in the books. We have to be doing some instruction in between. Another thing that I do want to point out and just be really clear with is that if you've determined that fact fluency is an issue in your classroom and you're listening to this podcast and you're saying, okay, so I got to work on fact fluency, that doesn't mean that you put the brakes on teaching your curriculum and your content. It's something that you have to do while you are moving through that, because we are not in any way saying stop, work for a month to develop basic fact fluency, then jump back into your curriculum. That is not the message we're sending. We're sending a message that here's something that you can do that's going to complement what you're currently doing in the classroom. But you have to keep moving through and providing tools and for students to access if they don't have that fluency yet. So you still need to keep moving through grade level content.
Beth, I think you just gave a great preview of our next episode, where we're going to be talking about when is it time to move on, and how long do I spend building proficiency or mastery of a particular concept. So just to summarize some of the big ideas here today, we are trying to figure out what's a first move. Like, I'm at that awareness stage. I know that I want to change. So maybe we start with assessing. Maybe we need to sit down and get an understanding of what is our starting point here from an asset-based lens. What can students do that I can build from? We talked about leveraging solid research-based resources like Alex Lawson's What to Look For, or Jennifer Bay Williams' Figuring Out Fluency. Or another high leverage move is just to start building in fluency games, redefining what practice looks like away from worksheets with 20 stacked addition problems to some meaningful, engaging games for students to practice in a different way that's going to support retention is a high leverage move that we could do tomorrow.
So we talked about many aspects of our, say, math classroom at, say, the leaves of the tree, which is sometimes the resources that we have to make use of engagement, and we talked about the branches of the tree, which sometimes are the moves that we make, like how do we change practice, what do those moves look like. We talked about the limbs of the tree, which is like, what does our professional development need to look like in order to engage teachers or even engage ourselves to go down a pathway that we know is important to go down. We believe that there are 6 key elements of a effective math classroom for ourselves and our students, and if you want to learn a little bit more about those 6 areas and maybe where you stand in the 6 areas, or what pieces you could strengthen, you can head on over to makemathmoments.com/report. You can fill out an assessment there that helps you gain insight on those 6 areas and get some next steps to support each of those areas. That's makemathmoments.com/report.